up, guys? This is the host of No Holding Back, Chris Yellow. As you guys know, the sports world has been gravely affected by the pandemic of 2020, aka the coronavirus. That has affected a lot of sports and diminishing the attendance to zero when it comes to attending matches or games in the sports world. So today we have Brandon on the podcast to discuss the UFC and why Conor McGregor has chosen to retire, and if this is a long-term retirement or he's planning a potential return, and who he could potentially face if he comes back. So thank you so much, Brandon, for coming back on the podcast.
Always a pleasure to be on the podcast, Chris. Always a great time. For me, one of the reasons why Conor McGregor did retire is because when they have people in attendance and they have the gate, what they call it, and they have all these fans there, I believe that Conor McGregor gets a portion of that money. That when people, it's probably about 5 to 10%, but I believe Conor McGregor probably makes a portion of that and goes towards his pocket. And I believe that the UFC cannot afford the money he's asking for, and that he deserves, though, because he does bring in a lot of attendance to the fights, and he brings in a lot of viewerships to watch on the big screen on TVs. So that's my big reason for it, because it's hard to pay some of the money when you don't have the fans coming in and generating that extra revenue that helps pay some of these people to go fight, obviously, right?
And what do you think would hold him back from potentially returning?
Well, one thing that's going to hold him back from wanting to return, in my opinion, is that he already makes so much money in everything he does. Like, if you look at his Proper 12 whiskey, probably makes plenty of hundreds of millions of dollars off that just alone. And that's not including that he has his own clothing line, he sells his own training programs, that's not including his sponsorships that he has with Reebok and for sure supplement companies, etc. So in my eyes, this guy already makes so much money. He's proven everything that he could already do in the sport of the UFC at lightweight and the featherweight division at 145 and 155 pounds by being the only one of the only guys to be a two-time champion in two different weight classes.
And I know if I were to ask you from a personal standpoint, if Conor McGregor would come back, you would obviously say yes, because you would love to see him coming back.
Of course.
But, breaking down the situation as it is, will he come back?
I believe Conor McGregor will return, but in only certain cases, though. I think he would only return if he's able to get that big fight with Khabib, who's already 31 years old and is a current lightweight champion. So if he's able to get that fight, I believe he would actually go and fight again. And then the reason for that is because they had a huge rivalry. I believe it was back in 2018 when they last fought, and Conor McGregor lost by submission. And ever since then, he's wanted to redeem himself, because Conor McGregor has admitted that during that training camp that he fought against Khabib, that he wasn't at his best, and he had a lot of personal things going on in his life. He had injuries leading up to that fight, so he wants to be able to get a second shot at the title to redeem himself and hopefully claim the lightweight title once again.
And from the standpoint, the big rivalry between Khabib and Conor McGregor, do you see this as only being one match, since it's the big rematch that everyone is dying to see, or can you potentially see more matches coming out of this?
Honestly, Chris, I could see a bunch of matches coming out of this, because I remember seeing a message from Khabib that he posted online saying that he would only accept a fight between him and Conor McGregor if he's able to beat the previous interim champ, who was Dustin Poirier. So if he's able to beat Dustin Poirier, according to Khabib, then he would get a shot at the title. But we don't. So until then, we're not 100% sure. But honestly, I think it'll be a great fight. Conor McGregor has already fought Dustin Poirier before. He's no stranger to him. They fought him before, and Conor McGregor has beaten him in the past. So I would not surprise me if they have another bout between those two guys. And I think, Conor McGregor, if he was to fight him, he would beat him, because he's proven to beat him before. I would say at Dustin Poirier's best, I would say, or close to his best, because he's just coming off recently out of Dustin Poirier was coming off recently out of not being able to fight. He took, I believe, 2 years off from fighting, and he just recently came back and won his last match this year. So I think Conor McGregor has the upper hand if he was to fight him.
And what other fighters can potentially face up against McGregor besides those two? So if he has to get to Khabib, he has to face Poirier first. So obviously he's gonna have two fights, and maybe then he could call it quits. But let's say there's more fights that lead up to that, or after that. Who can he potentially face besides those two guys?
Well, for me, there's so many great fights to choose from because everyone's calling out Conor because he's the biggest guy in the sport. He brings in the most revenue. He brings in 2 million people 2 million pay per views per fight he does. So everyone's gonna want to see him fight, and everyone wants to fight him to get that bag. Everyone wants the money. So, but I think if he was to fight another person at lightweight specifically, then I believe it would have to be Justin Gaethje. One of the reasons why it would be Justin Gaethje because he's the current interim champion, and it would just make it a lot easier. Maybe if he cannot fight Dustin Poirier for whatever reason, fighting the current interim champion, who is Justin Gaethje, would get him a good chance at a title shot. That's one of them. Also, Justin Gaethje would be such a fun fight to watch because they're both great strikers to watch. I would go try to maybe knock him out. Also has great wrestling. It will be a great match between them, and also has great footwork, great leg kicks, and you're just watching, Conor McGregor do his stuff with his amazing striking skills. Again, great leg kicks. It'll be a great stand-up battle to watch between them. And I think if those two guys were to fight, I think Conor McGregor will win just because he's better on his feet. Unless Justin Gaethje was to use his wrestling skills, then he will be able to go towards that. And another guy I would say who Conor could possibly face would have to be Masvidal at 170 pounds. One of the reasons for this is because Masvidal is currently one of the biggest guys in the sport. Since Conor left and retired, he's been able to bring in so many pay-per-views for the company, for the UFC. And if you watched his last fight with him and Kamaru Usman, he brought in over 1.5 million pay-per-views. And one of the reasonings was just because of him. Because if it would have been anyone else fighting in that spot, it wouldn't have done as well. Even though that card was stacked, and you had many great fighters in that card, like Volkanovski in that crazy fight as well, and you had Jose Aldo in that card as well. I believe it was Masvidal who really brought in the revenue, and I believe both guys fought together, it would just create so much money and generational wealth for both of them. It's a fight everyone wants to see. Like, who wouldn't want to see, two of the best shit talkers on the planet in the UFC go at it? Yeah, it would just be amazing, and they're both amazing strikers.
And if we see a potential return from Conor McGregor, I think the ideal situation is fight the three bottom guys that you've mentioned on the list, leading up to Khabib being the final match of his career.
For sure.
Especially with all the revenue he's making off side companies that he owns, apart from the UFC world, where obviously he makes money off his fights. I think that would be a fantastic way to end it. The rematch of all fights, one of the biggest rematches against Khabib, especially everything that went down between those two guys over the course of the last couple of years. I think that would be a good final chapter in Conor's career, where he gets to walk away saying, at least I got my rematch. Whether if I won, I proved to everybody that he got one, I got one, and let's just say that we're both equally as good. We're both the best in the business. Or maybe you go for like a third match to determine who's the best in the world.
Yeah.
But I think if starting with the three bottom guys leading up to Khabib, like you mentioned, I think that would be the ideal situation for him, and then eventually retire.
Yeah, and not only that, I also think it gives him a time also to cement his legacy. Because right now, I believe he's ranked number 10 for the best pound for pound in the UFC. So just being able to add to this and beat Khabib, it would just be able to cement his legacy. As maybe an even higher rated pound for pound UFC fighter. And it would just make him just cement his legacy, make it a lot better for him. Create the generational wealth that we're talking about with those extra fights. And not even that, maybe even if he doesn't want to fight 155, maybe he can move up to 170 like he did with that fight with Cerrone, Cowboy Cerrone. He can even maybe beat some other people there and fight for the 170-pound belt, and maybe become the one of the only guys to win three belts. So if he's able to win maybe go up to 170 and beat Usman, he'll be I believe the first guy to win three belts, in three different weight categories.
And going back to like the ideal situation I was talking about, are you in agreement with that, or you envision something different?
Well, when you look about it, if you look at it, Conor is already 32 years old. He's already past his prime, you know, and it's hard to tell if he's still at his best. For me, I don't think he's at his best as he once was. I think his best was when he was a two-time champ at the featherweight and lightweight back in, I believe it was 2017. Now I think he's past his best, and to fight Khabib, who's only getting better with time, it's going to be tough, especially since, like I said before, Conor McGregor makes so much money off other things. He doesn't need to do UFC, and not only that, it's the longer you're in the business, it wears down on you physically. Like all these injuries you get, getting beaten in the face, getting concussions, probably all these head traumas from fighting and getting punched in the face, it creates more problems from fighters over time. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. He already has so many other like businesses going on outside of the UFC world that he can rely on for the rest of his life. He doesn't need to really. He could easily stop right now, and he'll be set for life with all the money he's made off the UFC fights and the money he's making off the side businesses that he has created for himself. And let's say he does say, "I'm gonna unretire and go on my last run and face maybe." The guys we mentioned.
Maybe three more fights, I would say. Yes.
I would say maximum three more fights for Conor McGregor before he hangs up the gloves. And I think that would be the right time for him to, call it quits officially for the rest of his life. He retires at a respectable age, so around like 33, 34 years old, depending how long, the matches are in between each other. And not only that, he doesn't risk hurting himself long term when it comes to his body.
Yes, because there's so many times for like even boxers, you could say, like so many times for any person who does a mixed martial art, or something with fighting. So like you see a lot of these guys, some of these people, they try to fight past their prime and they stay in the sport too long. And when they come out of it, they have so many health issues and problems with trauma, head trauma, they're not the same person anymore. Like look what happened to a lot of these like old fighters you probably know, like Muhammad Ali, what happened with him too. Like even like when he close to the end of his career was not nearly at his best, and he suffered from so many problems due to fighting. So sometimes you just retire when you're on top. That's my way of seeing it. But I also think Conor McGregor would probably maybe do one last boxing match before he retires, like for good in fighting.
And would that be a rematch versus Mayweather?
Possibly. I've heard a lot of talks about another, him wanting to do at least one more against Mayweather. But I'm not sure if Mayweather want to do one. So I think that could, honestly, that's something I would love to see. And that would be a crazy match for me to see. But I think Mayweather would definitely beat him. Like that would be a great fight. But I wouldn't mind also seeing, from one other reports I've heard, was him versus Manny Pacquiao. Apparently him versus Manny Pacquiao too, for me, I think would be more interesting, considering that Manny Pacquiao is more of an offensive fighter. It would just be more fun to watch, and it would be something different compared to Mayweather.
And what do you think he wants to prove himself in another boxing match? Like, you're a UFC fighter, stick to your lane, as they would say, your field, and now he wants to branch out and have a second goal at a boxing match. What does he get from that?
Well, one thing he definitely gets from it is a lot of money. Because if you look at the amount of money Conor McGregor made versus Mayweather in that match, he made more money in that boxing match than he's probably made in all or almost all his UFC fights put together. Because I believe he made something like up towards like 60 million for that fight. You don't make, you as popular as UFC is, you don't make that type of money in that sport. You make maybe if you're as good as Conor McGregor, you probably make between 2 to 4 million or maybe 5 million for a fight. You're not making anywhere close to 60 million for one match, you know. So that's definitely one of them. And number two is you're getting more notoriety when you go, because he's well known obviously in the UFC, but once you branch out into a boxing, you're not only getting the UFC's people attention, the UFC fans attention, you're also getting in people who are in love with boxing involved in this too, because there's probably people who love watching boxing who never knew who Conor McGregor was or didn't really like him then, and then they watch him fight and then they have a newfound respect for him, doing a completely different sport where it's a lot different, and not only probably beating someone, but maybe trying his best to beat someone, So it proves a lot.
And let's say he says, you know what, I'm gonna unretire, but I'm not gonna go to the UFC. I'm just gonna focus on boxing. I'm gonna have about 2 to 3 matches. So let's say he faces Mayweather, he faces Pacquiao. The third opponent, is it potentially possible to eventually see him score up against Mike Tyson since he came out of retirement?
Oh, that's interesting. One reason why I think that wouldn't happen for me is because I believe Conor McGregor, he's like a 155 fighter, 155-pound fighter, 170-pound fighter, and I think I know Mike Tyson was a heavyweight champion, and heavyweights are like 200 pounds and plus, or 215 pounds and plus. So if Mike Tyson is back to that same weight as he once was, around there, I don't think Mike Tyson would fight Conor McGregor because of the weight difference. It would be too much of weight for Mike Tyson to have to drop at his age of 53, 54 years old. It will be too much for him.
Okay, maybe it's hard for him to lose, but maybe it would be easier for Conor to gain. And think about the revenue on that. You're fighting three of the best boxers of the last 3 decades.
Well, if I have to be honest, it'll probably be fun to watch, but I don't think it would ever happen. I don't think Conor McGregor will be able to put on that much a weight, or not just weight, because to put on that much muscle. Because you don't want to be just putting on weight. To go up that high in weight, you have to put on some muscle mass. And to do that, I think it'll be very difficult for him to get that high in weight just to fight Mike Tyson. Especially since I've heard Oscar De La Hoya, who is like I think the manager of Golden Boys, say that he wants to come out of retirement. I believe Oscar De La Hoya versus Mike Tyson will be a better fight than McGregor versus him. That's my opinion. And especially since Oscar De La Hoya is already in his 40s, it will be I believe in his 40s, I think it will be a better matchup to see against two retired boxers than Conor McGregor, in my opinion.
And it's so like crazy how many scenarios this could come out of this situation, since he already branched out into the boxing world with one fight under his belt. Now he has the choice whether to pursue the UFC career or the boxing career, which, we don't expect like 10 fights from this guy. We expect maybe, 2 to 3 more fights if he could pursue the boxing route. But, in an ideal world, it would be fantastic for him to fight Tyson. But like you said, I don't think that would happen. But you never know when money's thrown at you. You never know in this world what you might do, what the decisions you might make. Maybe he bulks up a little bit more, and he could potentially, match his weight class and eventually take him in a match. But I would see him getting a beating from a Mike Tyson in his 50s, even though McGregor's younger.
It would be like a brutally honest like beatdown. Honestly, Mike Tyson, I believe, would take him out. But not even that. I just to go away from that, I think a better fight for Conor, even if it's not like I said Pacquiao or Mayweather, would definitely be Canelo Alvarez. I just feel like it would be a great opportunity for Canelo to make even more money than he's currently made, and it'll be something for the fans to watch. I believe Canelo Alvarez is like one of the best boxers out there currently, and to see Canelo fight Conor, for me, it will be a dream come true.
Okay, final predictions. Does he come out of retirement? Which path does he embark on? And what age does he retire? And when does he retire?
So I think Conor McGregor will retire. First of all, I think he'll retire maybe around 35. So I believe he has 2 years left. That's just my opinion. I believe he has 2 years left because, like I said, he already makes so much money off everything else he does. I guess all the side businesses that he has. So for me, I say he has 2 years left. He's gonna do, I would say, one more boxing match against who I'm not 100% sure with, but we'll just have to wait and see. And I possibly believe he has like 3 more UFC fights in him.
And honestly, I think that would be really fantastic for him to do. Show his worth as a boxer, finish his career on a high note, possibly and hopefully in the UFC, and close the chapter of him fighting and focus on his side businesses, like you said, and avoid risking long term problems with his body, retire when he's on top, and, doesn't have to suffer those consequences. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Brandon, for coming on the
Anytime.
podcast. Thank you guys so much for, continuing to support me and watching my videos. If there's anything, related to this topic in regard to the sports world or anything of your liking, don't be afraid to go check it out. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much, guys.